Right now, as you're watching this video, you are about to make a decision. Maybe you'll keep watching. Maybe you'll reach for your phone. Maybe you'll pause and think about something else entirely. And in this moment, you feel completely in control of that choice. The thought will arise, you'll consider it, and then you'll decide. That feeling is real. The question is whether it's true. In 1983, a scientist named Benjamin Libet ran an experiment at the University of California, San Francisco that has never stopped haunting neuroscience. The results, sitting there in peer-reviewed data that nobody has successfully overturned in more than 40 years, suggest something most people are not ready to hear. The decision you feel like you're making right now, your brain already made it, before you are conscious of wanting anything at all. Let's start at the beginning, because to understand what Libet found, you first need to understand what he was looking for. The question of free will is not new. Philosophers had been fighting over it for centuries before anyone thought to bring it into a laboratory. Aristotle believed humans possessed a deliberative faculty that allowed genuine choice. Descartes split the mind from the body entirely, placing human will in a separate realm above physical causation. Kant argued that free will was a necessary assumption for moral responsibility to mean anything at all. Every legal system, every religion, every ethical framework ever built has rested on one bedrock assumption: that you are the author of your own actions, that the choice is yours. But neuroscience had a quiet problem with that. The brain is a physical object. It follows physical laws. And if every single thought is the product of neurons firing in patterns determined by the prior state of matter inside your skull, then where exactly is the freedom supposed to enter? Libet didn't start by attacking that question directly. He started with something far smaller. He wanted to know the precise moment when the conscious intention to move actually arrives in a person's awareness. He set volunteers up in front of a specially designed clock. A dot moved around the face of it at a steady, measurable pace. The subjects were given one simple instruction. Whenever you feel the urge to flick your wrist, go ahead and flick it. Then note exactly where the dot was on the clock at the moment you first became aware of wanting to move. Meanwhile, Libet wired their scalps with electrodes, measuring electrical activity in the brain. Specifically, he was tracking something called the readiness potential, a small, detectable ramp-up of electrical activity in the motor cortex that precedes voluntary movement. This signal had been discovered in 1964 by two German scientists, Hans Helmut Kornhuber and Luder Dacke. They had shown that before you move, your brain starts preparing, not at the moment of movement, before it. Nobody had ever pinned down exactly how far before. The results came back, and Libet stared at them for a long time. The readiness potential didn't begin 100 milliseconds before the movement. It didn't begin 200 milliseconds before. It began approximately 550 milliseconds before the wrist flicked. More than half a second of unconscious neural preparation before the action ever happened. That alone would have been a significant finding. Here's what made it something else entirely. When subjects reported the exact moment they first became consciously aware of wanting to move, what Libet called the W moment, the clock reading placed that moment only about 200 milliseconds before the movement, which means the brain had already been building the action for over 350 milliseconds before the person was aware of any urge at all. Read that again slowly. Your brain starts preparing the decision. Then, roughly a third of a second later, your conscious mind becomes aware of an urge. Then the action completes. The sequence is not thought, then action. It is action being unconsciously prepared, then awareness of wanting to act, then completion. The conscious experience of deciding is not the origin of the process. It arrives somewhere in the middle of something that already started without it. Libet published his findings in 1983. The scientific response followed the usual pattern. Some researchers attacked the methodology. The clock reading was imprecise. The wrist flick was too trivial to generalize from. Some ran replications. They got the same results. Then they attacked those too. But the data held. And then in 2008, a neuroscientist named John Dylan Haynes at the Bernstein Center for Computational Neuroscience in Berlin ran an updated version of the experiment using technology Libet never had access to: functional MRI, brain scanning that could detect activity deeper and earlier than any electrode on a scalp ever could. Haynes had subjects lie inside the scanner and press a button with either their left or right hand whenever the impulse struck. They tracked a clock and reported the moment of conscious decision. Then, Haynes built a predictive model from the fMRI data alone. The question was simple. Could the brain scan tell you which hand the subject would choose before the subject knew? The answer was yes, by up to 10 seconds. A full 10 seconds before subjects reported becoming aware of their choice, the neural activity already contained the information about what they were going to do. The conscious decision, the thing you experience as deliberating and choosing, was the final visible output of a process that had been running invisibly for nearly 10 seconds before awareness arrived. The predictability hovered around 60%. Not perfect, but far beyond what chance would produce, and far beyond what should be possible if the conscious moment of choice was actually the point where the decision originated. Here's the part nobody talks about. Libet himself did not want to be the scientist who killed free will. He spent years looking for a way out inside his own data, and he found something. He called it the veto. Yes, the brain initiates the action unconsciously. Yes, the readiness potential builds long before awareness. But Libet noted there was a window, a narrow slice of time between the moment the urge reached conscious awareness and the moment the action actually completed. And in that window, subjects could stop it. They could feel the urge rising and choose not to follow through. He called it free won't. The ability to veto is not nothing, but it is also not quite what anyone ever meant by free will. It is the difference between writing the script and being allowed to strike a few lines before the final version goes out. The authorship is still somewhere else. The process is already running. You just get a brief edit window at the end. But here's what's fascinating. The implications extend far beyond any philosophy lecture. Every legal system on Earth is built on the concept of mens rea, guilty mind. The principle that for an act to be criminal, the person must have consciously chosen to commit it. Strip the conscious choosing out of the causal chain, and the entire foundation of moral and legal responsibility begins to crack. If your brain makes the decision before you're aware of it, what exactly is being punished when someone is punished for a crime? The legal system assumes the person could have chosen differently. That assumption requires the conscious mind to be driving. Libet's data suggests it wasn't driving. It was being informed of the destination after the car had already pulled out of the driveway. Defense attorneys have already begun citing neuroscientific evidence in cases involving impulse control disorders, addiction, and violent behavior. The science doesn't yet offer clean answers, but the questions are no longer hypothetical. They are showing up in real courtrooms, in front of real judges, with real consequences attached. And then there is the version of this that lands much closer to home. Think about the last time you made a choice you genuinely regretted. You said something you can't unsay. You chose the easy path instead of the honest one. You avoided the conversation you knew you needed to have. In the moment, it felt like you decided. But what if the architecture of that decision was already under construction before any conscious thought arrived? Before the weighing, before the reasoning, before anything you would recognize as deliberate reflection? What does that do to guilt? What does it do to the story you tell yourself about the kind of person you are? Neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky spent decades building a detailed case that virtually every human behavior can be traced back along a chain of biological, environmental, and historical causes stretching back before the person was born. In his 2023 book, Determined, he argues not just that free will is limited, but that the traditional conception of it is entirely incoherent. that the self who appears to choose is itself the product of processes it never chose and could not have chosen. He is not trying to let anyone off the hook. He is arguing that the hook itself may be the wrong tool. Most people, hearing Libet's results for the first time, move through the same sequence: disbelief, then something cold and unsettling, then the question of what it means for anything, then sometimes a strange and unexpected relief. Because here's what the research actually points toward. Consciousness may not be the initiator, but it is not powerless either. The veto is real. Awareness of your own patterns is real. The ability to deliberately shape the conditions under which you live, the environments you place yourself in, the habits you build over years, those things change what your unconscious brain reaches for in the first place. You cannot stop your motor cortex from firing before you are aware of it, but you can change the conditions under which it fires. What you practice, you automate. What you automate runs before conscious awareness, which means the choices that matter most may not be the ones you experience in the moment of decision. They may be the ones you made weeks or years earlier about who you were going to become. This is not the free will that Kant was defending. It is smaller, messier, harder to locate. It does not fit cleanly into any legal code or moral doctrine built before the age of brain scanning. But it might be the real version, the one that was operating underneath the story we told ourselves all along. Benjamin Libet died in 2007 at the age of 91. He never stopped believing that some form of meaningful agency existed somewhere inside his own data. He spent 40 years trying to find exactly where it lived. He never fully resolved it. The readiness potential still fires before conscious awareness. Haynes' scanner can still predict your choice before you know you're making it. The data hasn't changed. What we do with that is, somehow, still up to us. Or at least, it feels that way. And maybe, for now, that is the most honest answer science has. We don't fully know.